Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello readers, and welcome to episode 8 of Fully Booked. I'm your host Natalie, and today's episode will be my September reading wrap-up. Surprisingly, this month was a big reading month considering all the work I was putting into the podcast, as well as other things going on in my life. Maybe it's partially because we still had that last blast of summer weather, and I spent a couple days a week outside reading and generally enjoying these last days of summer. Because, believe it or not, September 21st is actually the last day of summer, despite all the autumn girl pandemonium that's already going on. Which, clearly, I gave into that pandemonium, seeing how early I ended up planning and releasing my autumn TBR. But putting that aside, let's get into what I read in September and my monthly stats. So to start off, I read 10 books total, with a monthly average rating of 3.78 stars. I read a total of 3,730 pages. My average time to finish a book was 7 days. I read 2 books on audio, which were Love Does by Bob Goff and Love Lives Here by Maria Goff. Now, I technically only DNF'd 1 book in September, but I realized afterwards that I forgot to include one more DNF for August back in episode 5. So, I'll just add it into the count here for the sake of things. And looking at the date DNF'd, I likely forgot because it was the second last day of August when I started and DNF'd this book. Literally all in the same day. So, for the books I DNF'd, which were Valley Verified by Kyla Zhao, and unfortunately, Bride by Ali Hazelwood, average percentage read up to was 15%. Also, I'm really not sure if you as listeners are that interested to hear these monthly stats, but I will say it's quite helpful for me to be able to look back and see which months I was reading the most versus least. So really, these monthly wrap-ups are like my personal audio diary of sorts that hopefully I can look back on in the future if I want to. But if those listening are finding this segment really boring, please let me know so I can stop adding these in and just focus on the reviews themselves. Now, I know you're waiting for me to just start talking about the books already, like, please, please, please. But I wanted to add that I feel like my book cravings, I don't know if that's even a thing, I just made that up right now, changed quite a lot over the course of this month. I seem to go back and forth between super cute, easy to read romances, and then thrillers. And I can't really tell you why I was in the mood for either of these, I just was. Unfortunately, we aren't doing so well for my autumn TBR as I only finished 1 out of 10 books, as I have other books besides the ones mentioned in episode 6 that I want to read. But I must say, I really was a ravenous reader this past month. Now, this is a reminder that it's okay to read at your own pace, however many books that ends up being. I definitely have my share of slower reading months, and this month just happened to be a bigger one, so don't feel bad about how much you are or aren't reading, and read at whatever pace you're comfortable with, and where you're actually enjoying the books. Okay, but enough rambling. Let's actually get into the 10 books I read in September. So, for the first book I read in September, we have The Last Word by Taylor Adams with a rating of 4.25 stars. Emma Carpenter lives in isolation with her golden retriever, Laika. Laka? I'm sorry, I actually don't know how to pronounce that. I'm just kind of guessing here. Laika, house-sitting an old beachfront home on the rainy Washington coast. Her only human contact is her enigmatic old neighbor, Deke, and via text, the house's owner, Jules. One day, she reads a poorly written but gruesome horror novel by the author H.G. Cain and posts a 1-star review that drags her into an online argument with none other than the author himself. Soon after, disturbing incidents start to occur at night. To Emma, this can't just be a coincidence. It was strange enough for this author to bicker with her online about a lousy review. Could he be stalking her too? As Emma digs into Cain's life and work, she learns he has published 16 other novels, all similarly sadistic tales of stalking and murder. But who is he? How did he find her? And what else is he capable of? I think this book ended up being a surprise, as I was originally only going to rate it around 3 stars, but the ending really ended up saving this book. Now, I know we're not supposed to like this author slash villain in the story, but I found myself disliking him more than I should have because of the way the author painted his character. I found him very arrogant and a bit misogynistic, to be honest. And it seems I'm even less of a fan of the Sigma male than the Alpha, also from the definitions that I read online about these two. And I think the reason his character came off worse for me was that he seemed unnuanced. Like, there wasn't much more to his evil intentions below the surface level, which I did come to realize was kind of the point later on in the story, but I still didn't like it. However, I did like the amount of action and suspense we get near the start of the book. I think only about 7 chapters in, Kane and our female main Emma start facing off against each other, which was quite refreshing for a thriller, I must say. And while the reveal at the end of the book didn't completely shock me, it made me think twice about how the events were described earlier in the book and the point of views we were being given or getting. So after reading this, I would definitely consider picking up another Taylor Adams book. But a warning for this one, there were some slightly gruesome descriptions of violence and blood, so if you're a bit squeamish about reading about someone being stabbed, for instance, I would caution you in picking up this book. Next up, I read Love Does Discover a Secretly Incredible Life in an Ordinary World by Bob Goff, with a rating of 3.5 stars. As a college student, he spent 16 days in the Pacific Ocean with 5 guys and a crate of canned meat. As a father, he took his kids on a world tour to eat ice cream with heads of state. He made friends in Uganda, and they liked him so much he became the Ugandan consul. He pursued his wife for 3 years before she agreed to date him. His grades weren't good enough to get into law school, so he sat on a bench outside the dean's office for 7 days until they finally let him enroll. Bob Goff has become something of a legend, and his friends consider him the world's best-kept secret. Those same friends have long insisted he write a book. What follows are paradigm shifts, musings, and stories from one of the world's most delightfully engaging and winsome people. What fuels his impact? Love. But it's not the kind of love that stops at thoughts and feelings. Bob's love takes action. Bob believes love does. When love does, life gets interesting. Each day turns into a hilarious, whimsical, meaningful chance that makes faith simple and real. Each chapter is a story that forms a book, a life. And this is one life you don't want to miss. I have to say, I did not expect to hear this wide variety of life stories when I picked up this book. Bob Goff truly has lived an extraordinary and whimsical life, letting God take him down all kinds of paths. I think the craziest story was the one about becoming the Ugandan consul by accident. While I did enjoy listening to all these different life stories, I'm not sure how much I learned on a personal level that I would actually take away into my real life, especially in terms of living out my faith. I think my biggest general takeaway is to, as Nike says, just do it. You don't always have to wait for a super specific answer / roadmap from God to start living to what you're being called to. That's why it's called Living Out in Faith. And this book inspired me afterwards to pick up his wife Maria Goff's book, Love Lives Here. So, the next book that I picked up is the one I just mentioned, Love Lives Here by Maria Goff, with a rating of 3.5 stars. This is a book about discovering what we really need. There are a lot of second best options, but we weren't made to live a second best life. Finding what we actually need is different than what we are often offered. There are many books full of opinions, steps, and programs. This isn't one of them. This is about craving the things that matter. Things that don't just work, but last. In a life that may seem to be all fun and games with an endless supply of balloons, author Maria Goff shows how this life is also lived with intentionality, passionate purpose, and a little planning, all of which make a life rich in legacy. But she had to figure out the help she needed first in order to live the beautiful life God wanted for her and wants for us. Love Lives Here is a collection of stories that include the ways Maria and her husband Bob navigated family their way, without clear instructions or a roadmap. It's about what they learned to make their lives meaningful and whimsical, and how they created a space for their family to grow together while they reached outward. Now, my rating isn't an indicator of the quality of the author's writing, per se, although I admit I have read some better written Christian nonfiction. But rather, I feel like it was too similar to Love Does, where I didn't gain a lot from this book, And the way she told stories felt too similar to the former book. Like, I didn't feel like I was listening to her unique voice at times. And I think I just chose to listen to it on audio at a bad point in time because I was feeling very unengaged with this general style of storytelling when I listened to it. And specifically, I found Maria Goff's writing voice more serious in tone. Literally how she sounded, but also how she told her stories. While Bob had a more humorous approach, which kept me a bit more engaged. So overall, I'm not sure Bob and Maria Goff's writing styles are completely for me, as I don't feel compelled to pick up any of their other books. I'm not sure if she has any, but I know he has written other books. But they may still be for you, so I would still encourage anyone to pick up either of these two books and see for themselves. Okay, book number 4 on this list is When in Rome by Sarah Adams with a rating of 3.75 stars. Amelia Rose, known as Ray Rose to her adoring fans, is burned out from years of maintaining her Princess of Pop image. Inspired by her favorite Audrey Hepburn film, Roman Holiday, she drives off in the middle of the night for a break in Rome, Kentucky, that is. When Noah Walker finds Amelia on his front lawn in her broken down car, he makes it clear he doesn't have the time or patience for celebrity problems. He's too busy running the pie shop his grandmother left him and reminding his nosy but lovable neighbors to mind their own damn business. Despite his better judgment, he lets her stay in his guest room, but only until her car is fixed. Then she's on her own. Then Noah starts to see a different side of Ray Rose. She's Amelia, kind-hearted and goofy, yet lonely from years in the public eye. He can't help but get close to her. Soon she'll have to return to her glamorous life on tour, but until then, Noah will show Amelia all the charming small-town experiences she's been missing, and she'll help him open his heart to more. Amelia can't resist falling for the cozy town and her grumpy tour guide, but even Audrey had to leave Rome eventually. While I am not new to the world of romance fiction, surprisingly, this was my first ever Sarah Adams novel, even though I've heard of her in the book community for years. If I had to describe this book overall, I would say that this is a perfect read if you're looking for something really fluffy and sweet. And I don't mean fluffy in a bad way, like there was no substance to the characters, but I would say that it's a story that you don't have to think too hard about, which is what we all want sometimes. I'm definitely a sucker for male leads like Noah who act all grumpy on the outside but are secretly softies and golden retrievers. Also, I love the small town setting of Rome, Kentucky, and all its charming and good-hearted residents. Funny story, which I think I'll mention in next week's episode, is that I somehow neglected to read the summary for this book and thought it took place in Rome, Italy this whole time, prior to reading the book, that is. But anyways, I know I'm saying the word love a lot right now, but I really did love our two leads and the relationship they had, and how they worked through their fears to ultimately end up together. Especially the part near the end of the book where they're being chased and they finally decide then to get into a relationship. I'm torn now between if I should pick up The Cheat Sheet or Practice Makes Perfect next by Sarah Adams. The former is the title I first heard of hers and has been on my TBR for a while, but I'm curious to continue this When in Rome series. And the second book follows Noah's sister Annie, who I also adored. And the answer is, I immediately picked up the second book, Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams, with a rating of 4 stars. So here's how this one goes. Annie Walker is on a quest to find her perfect match, someone who complements her happy, quiet life running the local flower shop in Rome, Kentucky. But finding her dream man may be harder than Annie imagined. Everyone knows everyone in her hometown, and the dating prospects are getting fewer by the day. After she overhears her latest date say she is so unbelievably boring, Annie starts to think the problem might be her. Is it too late to become flirtatious and fun like the leading ladies in her favorite romance movies? Maybe she only needs a little practice, and Annie has the perfect person in mind to be her tutor, Will Griffin. Will, the sexy, tattooed, and absolutely gorgeous bodyguard, is temporarily back in Rome, providing security for Amelia Rose as excitement builds for her upcoming marriage to Noah Walker, Annie's brother. He has one personal objective while on the job: stay away from Annie Walker and any of their possible attachments to this sleepy town. But no sooner than he gets settled, Will finds himself tasked with helping Annie find the love of her life by becoming the next leading lady of Rome, Kentucky. Will wants no part in changing the sweet and lovely Annie. He knows for a fact that some stuffy, straight-laced guy won't make her happy, but he doesn't have the heart to say no. Amid steamy practice dates and strictly educational tutoring lessons, Annie discovers there are more layers to Will's usual stoic attitude. As the lines of their friendship become dangerously blurred, Annie reconsiders her dream guy. Maybe her love life doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. While there was tons of sweet fluffiness abounding as well in this book, I was surprised to find I liked this book a bit better than When in Rome. For some reason, I found the way Amelia talked and thought a bit cheesy / cringy at times to read, while Annie actually came across as more normal. I think Annie was also more relatable to me personally, as I can relate to the feeling of being misunderstood / mislabeled. And I liked how the two mains helped each other resolve their own insecurities and fears, and ultimately made each other better, in addition to the awesome chemistry that they had. Oh, and I think the best thing I learned from this book that cannot be unlearned is the term stern brunch daddies, which, as described by James' character in this book, is when a dude who looks scary is actually all soft and sweet to the person he loves. In other words, it's a male who's grumpy outside times secret golden retriever, which is funny because I literally just described Noah in this same way in my review of When in Rome that I just gave you guys. I don't know how the exact name came about, but honestly, love it. And having heard this definition, I think stern brunch daddies are my favorite type of MMC, thinking back on all the romances I've enjoyed this year. I will say, if you're not a fan of some cheesy dialogue, you might not enjoy Sarah Adams' books. However, I find that sometimes I need a refresh in my romance reading, and needless to say, when I'm craving the ultimate sweet romance novel, I now know to turn to Miss Sarah Adams. Alright, next up on my list we have The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, with a rating of 4.25 stars. Casey Fletcher, a recently widowed actress trying to escape a streak of bad press, has retreated to the peace and quiet of her family's lake house in Vermont. Armed with a pair of binoculars and several bottles of liquor, she passes the time watching Tom and Catherine Royce, the glamorous couple who live in the house across the lake. They make for good viewing. A tech innovator, Tom, is rich, and a former model, Catherine, is gorgeous. One day on the lake, Casey saves Catherine from drowning, and the two strike up a budding friendship. But the more they get to know each other, and the longer Casey watches, it becomes clear that Catherine and Tom's marriage is not as perfect and placid as it appears. When Catherine suddenly vanishes, Casey becomes consumed with finding out what happened to her. In the process, she uncovers eerie, darker truths that turn a tale of voyeurism and suspicion into a story of guilt, obsession, and how looks can be very deceiving. With his trademark blend of sharp characters, psychological suspense, and gasp-worthy surprises, Riley Sager's The House Across the Lake unveils more than one twist that will shock readers until the very last page. Surprisingly, this was my first Riley Sager novel after hearing about him from so many booktubers for years since I started reading again. And needless to say, I wish I had picked up one of his books earlier, and this one didn't disappoint. I think one thing I enjoyed was how well he wrote his female characters and their perspective on the events of this story. And while I gave this the same rating as The Last Word, I would say that I actually enjoyed this book more. I felt the somewhat unreliable narrator, Casey, was a bit more believable in this book compared to Emma from The Last Word. And the way Riley Sager is able to paint an overall picture of the lake house setting, other characters, etc., was quite well done and gripping. I will admit, a couple of twists and turns I sort of expected, but the paranormal element threw me off a bit. Sorry for a small spoiler there. And I don't know how I feel about it due to the questionable plausibility that occurring IRL, at least for me. I'm curious how many of his other books have a paranormal element, as I did put Home Before Dark on my autumn TBR for this year, but I'm really not sure about any of his other titles. Regardless, Riley Sager is definitely a new favorite thriller author, and I will make sure to check out most, if not all, of his backlist books. Hey readers, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and hear me out before you hit skip. I'm so grateful for all my listeners who are with me on this reading journey, and I'd like to ask that if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review as it helps others find the podcast. Also, please consider supporting the podcast financially as it helps me bring you more exciting content, and you'll get some extras like bonus and subscriber-only episodes, early access to new episodes, and much more. The link to donate will be in the show notes below, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/fullybookedpod. Thank you so much again for choosing to listen to Fully Booked, and now back to the episode. Alright, next up I read Daydream by Hannah Grace with a rating of 3.5 stars. When his procrastination lands him in a difficult class with his least favorite professor, Henry Turner knows he's going to have to work extra hard to survive his junior year of college. And now, with his new title of captain for the hockey team, which he didn't even want, Henry absolutely cannot fail. Enter Hallie Jacobs, a fellow junior who finds herself befriended by Henry when he accidentally crashes her book club. Hallie may not have the romantic pursuits of her favorite fictional leads, but she's an academic superstar, and as soon as she hears about Henry's problems with his class reading material, she offers to help. Too bad being a private tutor isn't exactly ideal given her own studies, job, book club, and the novel she's trying to write. But new experiences are the key to beating her writer's block, and Henry's promising to be the one to give them to her. They just need to stick to their rule book. Oh, and not fall in love. So this is the first time I'll be talking about a Hannah Grace book on the podcast, as it's the only one of hers I've finished so far. Considering the success of her first two novels, I'm sure some people are wondering why I've yet to finish a book of hers, and it really comes down to my personal taste. There are some problems I have with language, either too simple or explicit, as well as dimensions of the plot, as I feel like her books are the kind that everything reads exactly as it's written, if you guys know what I mean. And since I've read a wider span of romance authors by this point, this style of writing isn't always for me, and I find it kind of lacking, so to speak. While this book had similar issues as the previous two, I found myself more drawn to Hallie and Henry as characters and as a couple compared to the couples and characters in the last two books. Honestly, it's likely because their interests align more closely with myself and my personality, and especially certain struggles of Hallie's I could relate to. I also think this book did try to hit on some interesting aspects of love, not just romantic, and I love the progression of their relationship in this story. My biggest complaint is probably that for a book this long, which I think it was about 450 pages, I feel like the story was unnecessarily dragging on in the second half, where not much plot or conflict-wise was happening. Like, we were literally just getting a play-by-play of each day they went through / spent together, which was starting to get to be a bit too long for me. And I feel like the biggest conflict that happened within the last 5 to 6 chapters of the book, and then just got wrapped up very quickly, and the story ended. But besides that, I did enjoy the lovable cast of characters she created, and am now debating whether I should revisit the first two novels in the future, especially since I actually did get fairly far into Wildfire before I DNF'd it. But needless to say, I am more hopeful about picking up whatever novel she puts out next, whether it's continuing the Maple Hills series or a new book entirely. Alright, next up we have Lock Every Door by Riley Sager with a rating of 4.25 stars. No visitors, no nights spent away from the apartment, no disturbing the other residents, all of whom are rich or famous or both. These are the only rules for Jules Larson's new job as an apartment sitter at the Bartholomew. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful to say. One of Manhattan's most high-profile and mysterious buildings. Recently heartbroken and just plain broke, Jules is taken in by the splendor of her surroundings and accepts the terms, ready to leave her past life behind. As she gets to know the residents and staff of the Bartholomew, Jules finds herself drawn to fellow apartment sitter Ingrid, who comfortingly, disturbingly reminds her of the sister she lost 8 years ago. When Ingrid confides that the Bartholomew is not what it seems and the dark history hidden beneath its gleaming facade is starting to frighten her, Jules brushes it off as a harmless ghost story until the next day when Ingrid disappears. Searching for the truth about Ingrid's disappearance, Jules digs deeper into the Bartholomew's dark past and into the secrets kept within its walls. Her discovery that Ingrid is not the first apartment sitter to go missing at the Bartholomew pits Jules against the clock as she races to unmask a killer, expose the building's hidden past, and escape the Bartholomew before her temporary status becomes permanent. So, weird comment I have on this one is that I had a bit of a deja vu when I first started reading because the premise felt very similar to another book I read, although I read so many thrillers by this point that I could not for the life of me remember what book it was. I'm also surprised that I saw some low ratings for this book as I quite enjoyed it. I didn't exactly predict the last twist in this one and definitely felt disturbed at its reveal. The pacing in this story was also fairly good, although I felt like there was a gap of time that was sort of skipped over, like in the storyline, and then there's kind of this long waiting period where we as the reader watch Jules, our FMC, go through. Now, I get why authors do this in a story, but I find for me, it tends to make me lose interest a bit, having to read through these parts, and makes the suspense/thrill factor go down. But I also did see that this is one of Riley Sager's earlier books, and I do think the quality of his writing improved as he continued to write more books. This book was actually his third one ever, while the other one I read, The House Across the Lake, is actually fairly recent. It was published back in 2022. What I do like about his books, from what I've seen so far, is that each book has a very different premise, which makes them more intriguing to pick up. As I know, there are some authors like Lucy Foley, for example, that pretty much use the same setup for almost every book that they write. So for her, it's always like some sort of murder with multiple POVs from each person in the group that could be involved. And this can get old and not intrigue me to keep reading the author's books. But anyways, once again, I will say for this one, Riley Sager has blown me away. And perhaps, sadly, he's made me a bit pickier in my choice of thriller novels now, as I feel like I used to pick up a lot more mediocre ones in the past and just wasn't as picky with my taste. Okay, moving on to Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Monaghan with a rating of 3.75 stars. Nora Hamilton knows the formula for love better than anyone. As a romance channel screenwriter, it's her job. But when her too-good-to-work husband leaves her and their 2 kids, Nora turns her marriage's collapse into cash and writes the best script of her life. No one is more surprised than her when it's picked up for the big screen and set to film on location at her 100-year-old home. When former sexiest man alive, Leo Vance, is cast as her ne'er-do-well husband, Nora's life will never be the same. The morning after shooting wraps and the crew leaves, Nora finds Leo on her porch with a half-empty bottle of tequila and a proposition. He'll pay $1,000 a day to stay for a week. The extra $7,000 would give Nora breathing room, but it's the need in his eyes that makes her say yes. 7 days. It's the blink of an eye or an eternity, depending on how you look at it. Enough time to fall in love, enough time to break your heart. Filled with warmth, wit, and wisdom, Nora Goes Off Script is the best kind of love story. The real kind where love is complicated by work, kids, and the emotional baggage that comes with life. For Nora and Leo, this kind of love is bigger than the big screen. It's interesting because I rated Same Time Next Summer so highly, and meanwhile, this one I didn't enjoy as much. The style of writing felt different, and I'm not sure if it's because this was her first adult romance novel ever. I still enjoy the style of writing as well as the characters in this one, and I really like Nora's 2 kids and felt they were a good addition. I also do like that she writes about older women who have gone through things like divorce or already have kids, as there aren't as many romances about women in these stages of life, especially with rom-coms, and it's a bit refreshing to read. Now, I will say, if you're more of a fan of rom-coms or just any romances that, have that more ridiculous but fun setup, then this book won't be for you. A lot of the book was simply going through her everyday life, being a writer and looking after her kids. I also was kind of confused how she and Leo even fell for each other, as there didn't seem to be a very particular reason or turning point in the story. And I also will say that while I didn't enjoy this book that much because there were long segments where nothing was happening overall and in terms of romance, I think this is one of the better books that I've read for the celebrity/normal person trope. I felt like the way their relationship was portrayed, while heartbreaking at times, it was also more realistic of what one would experience, and this made it easier for me to read personally, as usually celebrity normal person is one of my least favorite tropes and not something I'll pick up right away. I also didn't like, I will say, how quickly we sped towards the ending, but otherwise I still enjoy Annabelle Monaghan as a romance author overall, just for something a bit different, and I still really want to pick up her book Summer Romance in the future. And finally, for the 10th and final book that I read in September, we have Roadside Attractions by Mara Quinn with a rating of 3.25 stars. Stella and Roman were supposed to be forever. However, that was before Roman left Stella with nothing but a note detailing vague plans to find himself and see new places. Now it's just Stella, her broken heart, and an extra half of the rent to pay. Enter Wyatt Song, free-spirited, infuriatingly attractive, and a notorious player. Roman's best friend and the bane of Stella's existence. As it turns out, Stella isn't the only one Roman screwed over, and there's nothing like revenge to bring together two people who can't stand each other. One uncharacteristically impulsive decision later, Stella ends up on a cross-country road trip to track down her ex with his former best friend. Somewhere along the way, between dodgy accommodations, car troubles, and misadventures, Stella finds herself battling her unexpected and undeniable chemistry with Wyatt. The last thing she needs is to fall for someone new when she's fresh off the heels of her heartbreak. But this whirlwind of a trip may not give her a choice in the matter. So if you follow me on Goodreads, you might have seen the review I posted there already last week. But of course, I'll be going into some more juicy details with some tiny spoilers today on the podcast. And it's perfect timing as the book just released to the public today. And I will say, while my rating ended up not being high, I think the author does show some promise, and I would still be interested to read more of her books someday, especially if they continue to include diverse characters and Canadian settings like this one did. Overall, if I were to compare, I would say this book was, for me at least, kind of the Canadian equivalent of a Hannah Grace book. I feel like this author tried to include some deeper, heartfelt moments between our two MCs, as well as exploring more of their past and why they were broken in certain areas of their lives. But at other times, the story felt a bit, for lack of a better word, shallow and just lacking in certain details. Now, usually with rom-coms, I find the reason for why they're quote-unquote enemies is usually pretty silly, but this one really seemed too one-dimensional even for me, as we're basically told near the start of the book how much Stella hates Wyatt simply because he's a womanizer, and that seems to be the only reason why she hates him. I will say, we find out more about this later and what the truth is, but when I first read this, I felt that this seemed too simple a reason to, again, quote-unquote hate someone, even though, let's be honest, none of us girls like to put it lightly, as they say, a F-boy. Also, I felt like we were given one-sentence descriptions of the character's background, which were never brought up again or very lightly brought up in the story. And I really wanted to know more, especially about our two mains, as I think it's only mentioned once that Stella is half Jamaican, and that's it. Other than that, I want to add that I enjoyed some of the banter / arguing between Stella and Wyatt. I think for me, it would have been more top tier if there were less swearing, but that's just my preference. As well as, I feel like this book could have been cool with dual POV, as we only get Stella narrating the events of the story. Especially since this is a he fell first book, which I neglected to read in the trope reveal somehow. But it'd be cool to get his perspective and getting to see Stella through his eyes as the story unfolds. Overall, I would say this was a fun read. Probably not something I'd reread and keep thinking about. But I would definitely love to see more romance books overall in Canadian settings like this one, as it's definitely easier for me and my fellow Canadian readers to relate to and just picture things in the story. And with that, that's a wrap for September. Now, I do appreciate you all so much for sitting through my longer episodes, and when it comes to reading wrap-ups, I have no certainty of how long they'll end up being, since I never know how much I'll read in a month. I will say, though, I'm hoping to keep up this somewhat faster pace, as I have a lot of seasonal books I want to read over the next few months, and I'm getting closer and closer to hitting my yearly number goal at the rate I'm going, as I think I'm currently at 63 out of 75 books as we speak. But anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you back here for episode 9. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.